This book continues on from 1 Samuel, after Saul's death. David sings a song lamenting the death of Saul and his son Jonathan. Despite the fact that Saul had tried to kill him before, David concealed the king's faults and instructed that Saul's honor be carried on and recorded in the book of Jasher. David goes to Hebron, where his followers and the southern tribe of Judah anoint him as king. After a while, the men come to David and make him king of Judah, one of the houses of Israel. They tell David that Saul, the former king of Israel, was buried by men who live in Jabesh Gilead. David sends messengers to them asking the Lord to bless them for burying Saul. David also lets the men know that he has been anointed king of Judah. Meanwhile, Abner son of Ner, the commander of Saul's army, had taken Ishbosheth son of Saul and brought him over to Mahanaim. He made him king over Gilead, Ashuri, and Jezreel, and also over Ephraim, Benjamin, and all Israel. The war between the house of Saul and the house of David lasted a long time. David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. David, who lives with his people in Hebron, had 6 sons with 6 different wives. Then Abner, one of Saul's commanders, sent messengers on his behalf to say to David, "Whose land is it? Make an agreement with me, and I will help you bring all Israel over to you." David agrees with one condition, that one of his former wife Michal be returned to him, even though Michal was still married to Paltiel son of Laish. Abner conferred with the elders of Israel and said, "For some time you have wanted to make David your king. Now do it. For the Lord promised David, 'By my servant David I will rescue my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of all their enemies.'" Soon after this, Joab and David's men return from a raid. Joab learns that Abner had just been in Hebron and goes to David and reproves him. He tells David that Abner only meant to deceive him. Joab has messengers go and bring Abner back, even though David is not aware of this. When Abner returns, Joab escorts him to the gate as if he simply wants to speak to him, but instead stabs him to death to avenge the death of Asahel, Joab's brother, whom Abner had killed earlier in Gibeon. When David hears of this, he curses Joab's house. David makes everyone in Joab's house mourn for Abner. Indeed, David himself mourns for Abner and refuses to eat. His people are happy with this because it shows that David had no part in Abner's murder. All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns. And the Lord said to you, 'You will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler.'" When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years. The king and his men marched to Jerusalem and captured the fortress of Zion, which is the city of David. David then took up residence in the fortress and called it the City of David. He built up the area around it, from the terraces inward. And he became more and more powerful, because the Lord God Almighty was with him. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, they went up in full force to search for him, but David heard about it and went down to the stronghold. Now the Philistines had come and spread out in the valley of Rephaim, so David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go and attack the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hands?" The Lord answered him, "Go, for I will surely deliver the Philistines into your hands." So David went to Baal-perazim, and there he defeated them. David again brought together all the able young men of Israel, 30,000 of them. He and all his men went to Baalah in Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim on the ark. They set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart with the ark of God on it, and Ahio was walking in front of it. David and all Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord, with castanets, harps, lyres, timbrels, sistrums and cymbals. The ark of God was eventually brought into the city of David with rejoicing. After the king was settled in his palace and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies around him, he said to Nathan the prophet, "Here I am, living in a house of cedar, while the ark of God remains in a tent." That night the word of the Lord came to Nathan saying, "The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me, your throne will be established forever." Nathan reported to David all the words of this entire revelation. In the course of time, David defeated the Philistines and subdued them, and he took Metheg-Ammah from the control of the Philistines, defeated the Moabites, defeated Hadadezer son of Rehob, king of Zebah. And David became famous after he returned from striking down 18,000 Edomites in the valley of Salt. He put garrisons throughout Edom, and all the Edomites became subject to David. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went. One evening David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. The woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, "I am pregnant." Then David gave Uriah a letter he had written and he told him to give it to Joab. In the letter, David told Joab to put Uriah in the very front of the fiercest fighting and then to pull away from him so Uriah would be killed. Joab did this and Uriah died in battle. Joab sent a messenger to tell David that Uriah was dead. When Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, learned that her husband had died, she mourned him. When the mourning period was over, King David had Bathsheba brought to him. She married David and had his son. But what King David had accomplished displeased God. David's older son Amnon falls in love with his half-sister Tamar and rapes her. David is furious but does nothing. Instead, Tamar's brother Absalom invites Amnon out to the country, where he and David's other sons murder Amnon. Absalom flees to a remote city for 3 years, but David, after mourning for Amnon, allows his son Absalom back to Jerusalem. Absalom plots a conspiracy, forming an army and winning the hearts of the Israelite people through displays of warmth and kindness. Supported by David's chief counselor, Absalom goes to Hebron where his followers pronounce him king. Informed of this event, David flees from Jerusalem with his men, and the people of the countryside weep as he marches by. One of Saul's relatives, however, curses and throws stones at the band, gloating over David's demise. David forbids his attendants to punish the man. Meanwhile, Absalom and all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him. When Absalom entered Jerusalem, in a display of defiance instigated by Ahithophel, he has sex with David's concubines. Absalom's aides advise him to attack David immediately, but one of David's officials, pretending to support Absalom, persuades Absalom to wait. This delay gives David time to muster an army, and his forces kill 20,000 of Absalom's followers in the forests of Ephraim. Riding along, Absalom catches his head in the branches of a tree. Joab ignores David's instructions to treat Absalom gently and drives 3 spears into Absalom's hanging body. When David is notified of Absalom's death, he weeps, and mourns. The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. As he went, he said, "O my son Absalom! my son Absalom. If only I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son. Job played a pivotal role as the commander of David's forces. Hearing of David's grief over the reported death of Absalom, Job confronted and admonished David. The king followed Job's advice to make a public appearance to encourage his troops. Job said to the king, "Today you have humiliated all your men, who have just saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and concubines. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see that you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Now go out and encourage your men." So the king got up and took his seat in the gateway. When the men were told, "The king is sitting in the gateway," they all came before him. Job's decision to take matters into his own hands makes Job a foil to David. While Job is suspicious of others and concerned with end results, David is trusting and believes that an earnest response in the present moment is more important than outcomes. David rebuilds his throne with continued acts of local diplomacy and with military victories over the Philistines. He composes a song praising God as a loving and kind deliverer, and it briefly recounts the feats of David's most famous fighting men.